Welcome back, everybody. My name is Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and in this series we are learning how to use Git and source control. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to commit. No, I'm not talking about how to commit to your wife or commit to your girlfriend. We're talking about how to commit to your code base. So once you have source control set up in your project, every time you go and make changes, source control is going to understand the old version and the new version of your project. It will understand that the old version didn't have those changes and the new version did have those changes. And while we are coding, every once in a while, we want to basically save those changes as another version in the history of our version control. So the technical term for that is called committing. So every once in a while we're writing our code, we're going to commit it or basically save that code down to our version control. I like to think of committing a lot like I think of checkpoints in video games. If you're playing a video game and you're on some level, eventually you're going to hit a checkpoint. So this way, when you die, instead of respawning at the beginning of the game or the beginning of the level, you'll respawn at the checkpoint. When we're writing our code, it's very similar in that we're going to write a bunch of changes and then we're going to commit it so that we can always revert back to this version if we need to. So in this video, we're going to learn not only how to commit, but how to write good commit messages. Because with every commit comes a title and a description, and we can customize what we're going to actually name that commit. And in this video, we'll talk a little bit about good versus bad naming conventions. So if you're watching this course, I hope you guys know that you are now committed to watching it till the end. So without further ado, let's jump into Xcode.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So we are in the Git playlist here, and we already have an Xcode project set up. It's called Swiftful Source Control. It is under source control already, and we have a remote repository for our project. If you don't know how to do any of that stuff, just watch the earlier videos in this course. So I'm going to assume you guys have been with me so far, and we have our Xcode project, and it's under version control. We have our project on GitHub. We can see it here. And in this video, we're going to talk about commits. In the last video, when you look at our project on GitHub, we can see some text right here. This is the last change to this file. So I look at these files, we can see the last commit message to each of these files. Now, if I go to GitKraken and I look at the Git history, we can see there's only one commit on this whole history. There's only one dot here. And the commit message is initial commit. So the last time that this file changed, content view, was from a commit with this message here. Now, we did not write initial commit because it was the initial commit. It was the first one. But the rest of the time now, when we make commits, we are going to be typing in the message ourselves. So think about this as we start to create our commits, right? We want to be able to see what was the last thing that changed in this file. So that's why naming our commit is going to get important. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about just what is a commit. As we actually start building, we're going to do a lot of branching and merging and things like that. But right now, we're just focused on simple committing. And what does that mean? Well, let's ignore the your work and ignore somebody else's work. Let's just look at the green line for a second. So think about commits. Each of these dots represent a commit. So think about these commits sort of like a checkpoint. If you are playing a video game and you hit a checkpoint, the next time you die, you're going to respawn at the checkpoint rather than at the beginning of the level or the beginning of the game. So while you're working and building and writing code, you're going to come across points where, hey, this could be a checkpoint. Let's make it a checkpoint by committing it to the version control. We're going to commit our changes into Git. So if I look here, there's only one commit so far. But as we start writing code, we're going to add a bunch more commits. And these again, we're going to think about them as checkpoints. So checkpoint meaning I can come back to this commit, this version of my project at any time. There's other aspects to it too, other than just coming back. So for example, think about the master branch as GitHub. So right now we have the master version on GitHub. We're going to clone it and bring it down to our computer here. And now while it's on our computer, we're going to make changes. And so while we're working, we're going to commit, then we're going to commit again, then we're going to commit again. And eventually when we're done with all these changes, whatever feature or whatever we're building, we're going to merge it into the parent branch here. So these commits will be basically for us. So if I'm building a feature and I'm on this last commit and I recognize maybe I don't like this changes and I want to revert back to this checkpoint, I can now do that because this was its own commit. If I didn't previously commit here, this whole thing would basically be one big change and I wouldn't be able to jump back in time. This also helps if you have other developers on your team who can actually see each of these checkpoints, and they can also go to that checkpoint or even copy that checkpoint and put it onto their branch. So we're going to get into the complexities of a lot of this later. But right now, I want you guys to just think about while we're working, we're occasionally going to want to commit, which is basically saving our changes as a checkpoint in the timeline. Let's do a couple actions so that we can actually see it in practice here. So let's pretend like we're building a feature in our project now, and maybe I don't want to use globe. I want to use heart.fill. It's just better. Let's give this maybe a font of large title, make it a little bit bigger. Let's also change this hello world to say Swiftful Thinking, and we're good. So pretend like this was your project. So we don't need to commit every single change, but for example's sake right now, let's pretend like this was the end of building this screen. So if you were building, maybe let's just say you're going to build a new feature and that feature has 3 different screens. You might create screen 1 and then checkpoint, create a commit, create screen 2 and then checkpoint, create a commit, and then 3 and then create one more commit. And then you take all 3 of those commits and merge them into the master. So right now we're just like working with the first one, right? It's like, what is the first changes that have happened? Okay, I've made these changes. Now I want to save them to my Git history. So I can do that by clicking integrate and clicking commit. I can also option command C. So let's get in the habit of option command C. And now we can commit our changes. I'm going to X out of this quickly before we actually commit it. You can also go over here to the source control navigator and we can see the uncommitted changes. So these are changes that are actively changed from the Git version that we are on. So the version we're on, the branch is called the main branch right now. It's the default branch. And we have these changes which are not yet committed into the repo. If I look at GitKraken, I can see the last commit is here, and then all of these changes are a work in progress here. So none of this is actually committed yet. So let's go ahead and commit it first through Xcode. We're going to integrate commit or option command C. So now we're going to get this view here. And now it's basically asking us of all of the changes in our project. So before we commit this though, there are 2 files here that have appeared to have changed, but we didn't actually do anything. There's this file called the DS store and XC user data. And these are basically just 2 files that are created for the Xcode project that you're working in that really you don't need to share with other developers. There's really no benefit for most cases of pushing these to Git. So what we're going to do before we actually continue this, we're going to jump back into Xcode. We're going to open up settings. We're going to go to source control and go to Git. And we're going to tell Xcode to ignore those 2 files just because we don't want to commit them. We don't really care. Now it's not really a huge deal. If we do commit them, it just gets really annoying because they're constantly changing and they're really not doing anything in terms of Git history. So in here, let's add XC user data /. And let's also add in here .ds_store and click enter. I think that's all we have to do. I'm going to close this. I'm going to Command-Shift-K to clean and rebuild. I'm going to option Command C. And now when I go to commit this, I can see that those 2 files are not here. They're ignored. So this is how it's going to look most of the time. It's got a file here for all of the files that have changed. If you changed more than just the content view, you're going to have another file here and another one down here, and another one down here. And you can come in here and you can see the changes in all of these. So in order to actually commit this, so to get it onto our branch here, we're going to need to add a commit message. And then we're going to have to stage the changes. So if I look at this screen here, I can see, okay, this is changed. This is showing me the old version and this is showing me the new version. This is actually one of the things where I'm a little upset with how Xcode does it. I find this view to be sort of confusing and I think other devs do as well. Whereas if I look at GitKraken and I look at this and I click on content view, it's much easier to see like this is red and this is green. And GitKraken also has this inline view where I can see it look like where it's inline in one file, or the split view where I can see changes on the left and changes on the right. So this is just one place where GitKraken starts to get much better than what Xcode is offering. I do expect Xcode to get better in the future. When we're looking at this, we can see here, there's no numbers on these two lines, so they've been deleted. And this is what is the result. This line is not changed. This line has been deleted. This one has been added. Great. Let's add this. Let's write a new commit message in here. We're going to say, let's call this my first commit. And then we're going to stage all the changes and then commit them. The next video in this series is going to be all about staging and what that means. So let's not worry about it right now. Think about this screen as which of the changes do I actually want to save? All the ones that I want to actually save, let's put in the stage. So all of them, and then let's commit everything that is staged. So all the changes and then commit. And most of the time your process is literally going to be Option, Command C, type your commit, stage all, click commit. So I can see here that this is committed. When I open up GitKraken, I can actually see the commit immediately. So this is again why I really like GitKraken. We can see it in Xcode as well. And if I look at the repo, we can see my first commit here. I think this U maybe means unchanged, meaning there's no changes in it right now. But so it's saved. So when I go back to my content view here, there's no more little blue dot because there's nothing that is uncommitted in this file. This is how it is on the branch, at least, that we are checked out on. Again, if I look at GitKraken, so GitKraken is still showing me those two files because it does not know to ignore them because that was an Xcode specific thing that we did. Later in the series, we're going to actually create a git ignore file in which we're going to actually ignore these. But for right now, we'll just leave them in GitKraken because they're not going to really bother us right now. Let's get in the habit of writing some commits. So let's come down here, create a button that says maybe click me and click enter. I don't know what the button does, but that's my new feature. Let's call it our feature. We can see on the left, source control, uncommitted changes. We have a uncommitted change to content view, which has been modified. And let's Option Command C. We see the change. We like the change. My second commit, stage commit. Let's do it one more time. Content view. Let's delete the button now. Option Command C. Another commit, stage, and commit. I'm purposely not clicking push here. We're going to do that in a future video. So let's jump back to GitKraken now and just look at our tree. I can see here that we have the first commit, the second commit, the third commit, and another commit. So at any point in time, I can now go back to these commits, or I can just see the code in the commit. So if I click on one of these, I can see the actual code from that commit. So there was a button here. It added this button, but on this last commit, looks like it deleted the button. So I have 3 commits, and you're going to notice now that there's 2 tags here. Main is here and main is here, right? Main is our main branch of our repository. But why is there main twice? It's here twice because one of these is tracking remote repo. One of these is tracking local repo. So when I look here and I look at GitHub, if I refresh this, I can see here, there's no other commits other than that initial commit because GitHub version only still has this. My local version only on my computer, still the same branch, still the same repo, but a different clone of it has these commits. So again, this is on GitHub. The rest of this is only on my local computer. And that's why this is labeled here twice. So let's go back into Xcode now. Just like we did in GitKraken, we can also see the commits. If we click on these commits here, we can see the changes and all the files that have been changed in each of these commits. So we do have our little history here. This history here is the same as this history. I think this is much easier to actually visibly see and understand than this. Maybe just a personal preference. As we look at these commits though, we can recognize that my first commit, my second commit, my third commit is really not explaining anything, right? We added a button here, but this just says my commit. So really when we're doing these commits, let's add another button back. Let's say maybe click me. Let's Option Command C. When we make these commit messages, these are for us. It's for me and other developers to see the message. And really what it is I want to be able to see at a high level and know what is going to be under the hood here. If I click on this commit, what are the changes most likely going to be? You can imagine a situation where you have hundreds or thousands of commits in a single project. And I go back in time. Maybe I want to look at what I was doing a year and a half ago. These commit messages are all I'm going to be able to see. I can click in and see the code changes, but if I have to click into every single code change because they all just say my first and second commit, I'm never going to know which one to click on or what changes were underneath. It would take me hours to figure it out. So when we're actually creating these commits, we really want to be specific in what we are saying. So better than writing my first commit would be something like add click me button. So now I know what this commit was doing. Let's stage it. Let's commit it. And now when I look at the history, I know exactly what this one is going to do. And as you start writing more commits, you're going to get more and more confident with what you should actually be putting here. Generally, I try to avoid special characters. You can put them in, but I would avoid them. And overall, you're really just going to get used to it as you go. So sometimes it's a big commit with 100 files. Sometimes it's a really small commit with one specific button. But you're going to get into a flow as you keep doing this of what you want to actually name these commits. Let's do one more good one here. So I'm going to do another one. Let's right click, create a new file. Let's create a SwiftUI view. Let's call this home view and click create. Click enter, hello world. Let's change that to screen 2, option command C. And now let's commit this. We can see here there is 2 files now that have been made changes to them. The home view, which is obviously our new view that we just created, as well as this source control XC project. So this PBX project file is basically our parent file that holds the project. So because we added a file, it is now changing this. Most of the time when this comes into source control, you want to commit it, but you don't really need to do anything with it. We're just going to commit it. While we're here, I think I also forgot to add that if you click at this little icon here, expand file, you can see the full file here. So right now it's just showing us the changes. So it's just this one line of code that we changed, but we can also see it in a different view here. The reason that this whole file is not blue, so this entire file is new, but only this line is changed, right? And that's because when you add a new file, it doesn't register the entire file as a committable change. Instead, it has this little A here that says we've added this file. So it's a new file, and the file also has this little M pointing out the unstaged changes. So it's added and it's been modified. So we added this file, and then we modified the file to say this. So let's come up here and say add home view. Cool. We can see it here in our list as well. Let me say back to Xcode. Sometimes while you're building features, right, maybe you don't actually create the entire home view. Maybe it's going to be a long process. So maybe we're going to cut this, we're going to create a Z stack, and we're going to add some code here, and then we're going to option command C, and we're going to say home view updates, maybe progress. So I'm not waiting to finish the entire screen, but when I hit a checkpoint, when I made progress, and I know that it's right, and I want to save it down, I'm going to stage all and commit. Maybe again, we write some more code and we finish it up, and this should actually be a V stack. Command option C, and now we're going to say home view finished. Let's stage and commit. Cool. So now if other engineers see this path, you can see that these commits are much more descriptive than these commits. Another commit, second commit, blah, 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 doesn't really work. Now, there are times when you're building your own app and you're just messing around and you're trying to debug something and you want to do commits, but you get lazy. And so there are times where people do bad commits like this. But generally speaking, if you're on your own project, it doesn't matter much because you'll remember what this was. But if you're on a big project with other engineers and other engineers are going to be seeing this, you want to make it explicit so that they actually understand what's happening in these commits as well. Chances are they're not going to actually go into every single commit you have, but at a high level, as a senior engineer, I want to be able to see what are the things that this person's been working on, and I should be able to do that through your commit messages. The last thing I want to talk about here is, as we wrap up, is actually writing these messages even better than what we have here. So if you just Google how to write a good commit message, there's lots of articles that come up, and teams have been doing this for years, right? We have to remember Git is something that is relevant to all software engineering. It's not just Swift. It's not just Xcode. It's not just iOS. every software engineer is writing Git. And so Git best practices have been around for a long time. So if you just Google how to write good commit messages, you're going to get tons of opinions and tons of articles on how to write your good commit messages. I'm going to scroll down here. The bottom line of a lot of it is you have good ones and there's bad ones. So what we just talked about, a lot of bad ones is like, I think I fixed this. Oops, changed style. Doesn't really tell me what style it actually changed. Fixed a bug on landing page. What bug did you fix? That was not descriptive at all. Sometimes in these messages, we want to be incredibly specific. For example, maybe this button was broken and we fixed it by adding a background color.red. We can literally be incredibly explicit here and say, fixed a bug where the background on the click me button on content view was not showing correctly. And we'll stage and we'll commit. Much longer message here, but still explains what it is. Now, generally speaking, I'm not a fan of these super long ones because it becomes kind of hard to read if there's thousands of really long commit messages here. But I've seen it happen, and it's probably not a bad thing if that's what's going to explain what's in this commit. If there's a lot of changes in a commit, sometimes people will do something like, let's change this to green, and let's change this to Swiffle. Sometimes people will separate it by commas. So it'll be like change click me background color, comma, change Swift full text, comma, something else if you change something else, and then stage and commit. Now you could have made these two separate commits, or you could put it all into one and just do something like this. Again, this is like best practices that you're going to get into as you start doing this a lot. But what I want to get at here is actually writing really good commit messages by having some sort of system for your project. So I can see here, feat for feature, chore for doing something that is like a mundane task, fixing bug or update, or being very explicit in like a MIDI sentence here. So these are good and these are bad, but there's also teams that have very specific methodologies for the team. So for example, in a lot of my projects, I actually like to have a very specific way to commit for projects. So if I come back into Xcode here, every team will basically have different rules. But one rule I like to have is for, let's call this commit messages, is depending on what you are building, add a prefix to it. So I'm going to go through this. This is a very opinionized version of how to write commit messages. If you don't have any opinion, this is your first time, I think this is a good habit to get into. Because when you start working for a company and with other engineers, they probably will have their own methodology that you should very easily be able to adopt. So for example, if I was building a new feature, I would write feature and then description of the feature. If I was fixing a bug that is in production, bug in production, so something that's already out to users, I will say patch, because I'm going to patch something that's already out. And then description of patch. If it is a bug not in production, so it's just a bug in my app, I might say bug. And then description of the bug would be like fix this bug or fix this. And then I would have a description of the bug. I also might have, if I was just, maybe I was just writing comments like we're doing right now. And so just like mundane tasks, I might say clean and then say description of changes. And then lastly, I might have a for release commits. So if I did a new release and I push something to production, I might say release and then description of release. So right now, for example, we added this comment to our code base, but it's not a new feature. It's not a patch. It's not fixing a bug. It's not a new release. We just are changing the code base. I'm going to consider this under the clean bucket. I'm cleaning my code base. I'm organizing my code base. If I was renaming things or moving files around, that's in the clean realm. So I might say here, let's go clean and let's say add commit message documentation. Stage and commit. Let's go back to our content view. Maybe we're going to change this. So maybe this is in production right now and it's green, but it really should be red. So we should actually change it to red. Because it was in production, I'll say patch, fix, click me background color to red, was green. Stage commit. Let's go back into our project here. Or maybe I wanted to add a second button here, right? So add another button. This is my new feature. Click me to. Let's call this one maybe subscribe button. Subscribe. Option Command C. Let's add in a new feature and let's say add subscribe button. Stage and commit. So if I look at my commit history now, the reason I like to do some sort of prefix is because I can see very quickly what are the changes that are happening in this code. Are these clean? Are these patch? Are these feature? So if I have a junior engineer on my team that's making all these hundreds of commits and they're writing it like this without any sort of prefix, I don't really know if these are like refactoring changes. Are these new features? Are they fixing bugs? So I like to have some sort of pattern like this where I can see very clearly, like if they were building a feature, you would have 20 commits that all say feature on them. So you'd start to get in the hang of, all right, this whole section is, this engineer has been building this feature for a while. Bunch of new features on this branch. Or maybe it's only clean. All right, so now I know all the things that are happening here are not changing the feature. They're just tweaks to our code base, adding documentation, things like that. Again, this is opinionated. I'm not saying that you need to do this. I've seen teams that do exactly this. This is a good starting point, I would say. When you join a team, they might have their own rules for this. You should ask. If you join a team, you should ask the senior engineers, what are the rules? How should we do our commit messages? And then get in the hang of it. You do not need to be explicit, but writing a good commit message is literally half of the battle to be able to go back in time and look at your history and know what changes have happened. This is going to be for you to see and also for other engineers to see. So when you're working on a large project, how do we write our commits? You guys should all get on the same page of like, how do I write commits? What's a good methodology for naming the commits? Do we have naming conventions? And if so, what should I do? If you don't have one, I would say just start with something basic, sort of like this, where you have features, patches, bugs. So generally what I'm doing is I'm building features, and let's put this here actually. So I'm going to put this down here. So normally my flow is I'm building a feature, I'm building a feature, I'm building a feature. Cool. Now I'm going to push the feature not to release to the App Store, but for internal use. I'm going to push it so that I can test it, my friend can test it, my test users can test it. And now they're going to come back with a bunch of bugs. All right, so now I'm going to add commits to fix all those bugs. Now let's push it to production. All right, when I push it to production, we're going to create a release commit. So I pushed it to production. I'm going to create a commit, call it release, so that I can see in the history exactly where this release happened. Just make it easier for myself. Now it's in production. Users are using it. Turns out there's more bugs we did not find. Now I got to go and I got to make some patch commits. So I got to fix the bugs that are in production. And so that's the general flow of how this works. Mundane tasks like reordering the documentation, I'll call clean. So let's just say here, clean, reorder, commit, message, documentation. Stage, commit, and let's look at it. We can see it here. Again, this is why I love GitKraken. This is so easy for me to see versus something like this is so annoying. Like Xcode really needs to improve, I think, at least on their source control. But at the end of the day, that's not why we use Xcode. We use Xcode to write the code, and we can use third-party GUIs like GitKraken for exactly what we're doing here. You're guys going to notice before we wrap up that this is only on my local, and this again is my remote is still down here, and my local is up here. So all these changes have not been pushed to GitHub. They're only on my local repo, and that I've done on purpose. We are not going to push these to the remote repo just yet. We're going to continue working in our local version for now. So that's it for this video. We now know how to commit, and we know how to write really good commit messages. In the next video, we're going to talk about staging. So you notice that every time we actually commit something, and I'll do it one more time, Option Command C, and we can see here that we are clicking the Stage All button. And in the next video, we're going to talk about what that actually means. I think last thing I should actually point out is we should never, ever, ever commit something that does not compile, right? So if this doesn't work, if I can't actually build my project, I could theoretically commit this, but I should never do this. That is really bad practice. Probably the only bad practice you really could do is commits that don't compile and actually break. Because if another dev were to download this and they try to run it, obviously it doesn't work. So only commit, obviously, when your build is actually compiling. The last thing I'm going to do here before I wrap up is actually just use GitKraken. So maybe I want to, again, delete this button. I have been Option Command C in Xcode. We can also just use GitKraken directly. So we can go into GitKraken and we can write in our commit messages. Literally this easy. We can just write the commit messages here. Now, I want you guys to remember that we ignored two files in Xcode, the DS store and the XC user state file. So when I write this commit, I want to make sure that I'm not committing those two files. Again, it's not the end of the world if we commit them. We're going to ignore them later. Right now, GitKraken does not know to ignore those files. So what I'm going to do here is just stage. So normally we've been clicking in Xcode, we've been clicking stage all. So I'm going to now, instead of stage all, I'm only going to stage this change. So in GitKraken, I'm going to click on this and stage this change only. And then I'm going to commit. So I can write the commit message here, or down here, I can write a summary or even a description, but here I will put maybe feature, remove, what do we remove? Click me button, click me button. And so up here, this commit changes to one file. Cool. I've done it in GitKraken as well. All right, guys, that is it for this video. My name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.